She's too old to give me sons." That was the first thing I ever heard said about Nell Brant, and Garrett Stowe said it loud. The way a man says a thing he wants the whole platform to hear, so nobody could later claim he'd been anything but honest. The noon train had just bled its steam out across the boards at Cedar Gap, and the woman who'd stepped down from it stood there in a gray traveling dress with the dust of 300 miles on the hem, holding a carpetbag in both hands like it was the last solid thing in the world. I'd come into town for nails and coffee and a new singletree, and I'd have told you that morning that nothing on God's earth could make me set those errands down. I was wrong about that, the way I'd been wrong about a good many things since the winter I buried my family. But I'll get to that. Stowe looked her up and down the way he'd look over a horse he'd decided not to buy. He was a prosperous man, Garrett Stowe, owned the freight line and a piece of the bank and a fine white house on the rise above the church, and he'd lost his first wife to a fever 2 years back and wanted another the way he wanted everything, quick and cheap, and to his exact specification. He'd sent away for a bride the same way he'd send away for a plow. "The letter said you were a widow," he said. "The letter did not say you were a gray-haired widow." "I am 33 years old, Mr. Stowe," the woman said. Her voice didn't shake. That was the first thing I marked about her, standing there by the freight scale with a sack of coffee on my shoulder. A woman gets stood up in front of half a town, you expect the voice to shake. Hers didn't. If that is too old to keep a house and tend a man's land, then we have both been ill-served by the post. "It's not the house I'm thinking of." He said it with a little smile to the men around him, and a couple of them laughed, the low laugh men give when they're glad it's somebody else's turn. "A man wants sons. A man my age with what I've built wants somebody to leave it to. I made inquiries before I wired the money. They tell me you were married 11 years to that schoolteacher back in Ohio and never once carried a child. 11 years. He let that sit. "I'm not in the business of paying good money for a barren field." The platform went quiet. Even the men who'd laughed went quiet. There's a kind of cruelty that's too naked even for an audience that came to watch, and Stowe had walked right past it without noticing, the way he walked past most things that weren't his own comfort. The woman did not weep. I watched her decide not to, watched it move across her face like weather and then pass, and what was left when it passed was something straighter and harder than tears. "Then we are agreed," she said, "that I have made a long journey for nothing, and that you are a smaller man than your letters. Good day to you." "The fare's not coming back to you," Stowe said. "I'll be writing the company about a refund of what I sent. You can find your own way home, or you can find your own arrangement here. It's nothing to me which." And he put his hat on and walked off toward his fine white house, and the men around him drifted after, and the platform emptied out, and left her standing there alone beside a battered trunk and a carpetbag with the whole town pretending very hard to be busy elsewhere. I should have gone and bought my nails. I want you to understand what I was then, so you'll understand why I didn't. I was 41 years old and I'd run the bar out on Dry Creek alone for 6 years. Since the winter the lung fever took my wife Ruth, and 3 days behind her, the boy she'd birthed too early and too hard. A boy we'd named Samuel before either of us knew he wouldn't keep the name long. I dug both graves myself in frozen ground on the rise behind the house, where the wind never quite stops and the larkspur comes up blue in May, and I'd told God and the cold and the 2 heaps of stone that I was finished. Finished with the wanting. Finished with the kind of caring that hands a man over to grief like a calf to a brand. I'd built a wall around the place where that lived, and I'd kept it standing 6 years, and I was proud of that wall the way a man is proud of a thing that's killing him slow. So I had no business at all crossing that platform. None. But there's a thing that happens to a man who's been alone with his own grief long enough. He gets so he can smell it on other people, the way you smell rain coming before the first cloud shows. And standing there by the freight scale, I smelled it on her, that particular loneliness of being thrown away by the world for something that was never your fault, and before I decided anything my feet had already carried me over. "Ma'am," I said, and took off my hat. That trunk's too heavy for you to carry, and the only hotel in this town won't give a woman a room without a man's name on the book, on account of the owner's a Stowe cousin, and they all sing the same hymn. You've got nowhere to sleep tonight that I can see." She looked at me a long moment. Up close her eyes were a clear gray-green, like creek water over stone, and they did not look grateful. They looked like a woman taking the measure of one more man who might be about to cost her something. "And you propose to remedy that," she said, "out of the goodness of your heart." "No, ma'am." I figured she'd had a bellyful of pretty speeches that day. "I propose to remedy it because I've got a house with a stove in it and 2 empty rooms and not a single soul to talk to but a cattle dog, and because that man back there is going to spend the next month telling this town you were cargo he sent back, and somebody ought to make a liar of him. I'm Owen Hale. I run cattle out west of here on Dry Creek. It's an honest place. I'm an honest man, which you've got no reason to believe and every reason to doubt, and I won't blame you a particle if you tell me to go to the devil." A muscle moved at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile yet, but it was the place a smile might someday come from. "Nell Brant," she said. "I know," I said. "The whole platform knows." That got the muscle to move again. "Mr. Hale, if I go anywhere with you, it is on terms. I have learned this winter not to travel on a man's goodness alone, because a man's goodness has a way of presenting its bill." She set the carpetbag down and folded her hands. "I will keep your house and cook your meals and earn my keep honestly, and I will sleep behind a door that locks from the inside, and there will be nothing more between us than work for wages and a roof for the cold. When spring opens the roads, I will have earned passage somewhere, east or further west, it's no matter, and I will go, and you will be free of me, and neither of us will owe the other a thing but thanks. If those are not terms you can abide, say so now, and I'll sit on this trunk till the next train and figure something else." I have thought in the years since that the whole rest of my life turned on the next thing I said, and that I very nearly said the wrong thing, very nearly said something kind and soft that would have made her gather up her bag and walk. Because what she wanted, standing there, wasn't kindness. She'd been clubbed half to death with other people's kindness. What she wanted was a fair bargain plainly kept. "Those are terms a man can abide," I said. "I'll add one of my own. You don't earn your passage and then thank me and go because you feel you've used me up. You go when you want to go for any reason or none, and there's a horse and a wagon to carry you to the depot whenever you call for it. I've kept one prisoner in my life, and it's myself, and I've had enough of jailers." I picked up the trunk. It was heavy as a dead steer. She had not exaggerated. "There's daylight to lose. The bar H is 2 hours out, and the road washes when it rains." She looked at me one more long moment. Then she picked up her carpetbag, and we went to the wagon, and behind us I could feel the whole town of Cedar Gap watching through every window glass, and I found I did not care. The road out to Dry Creek runs along the foot of the Antelope Flats, where the grass goes silver in the wind, and the bowstring hills sit blue on the far edge of everything, and we rode the most of it without speaking. She sat very straight with her hands folded on the carpetbag in her lap, and she watched the country the way a person watches a country they've decided not to love in case it doesn't love them back. The dog, a blue merle bitch named Job that I'd raised from a pup, lay in the wagon bed and put his chin on her shoulder about an hour in, and she didn't push him off, and that told me more about her than anything she'd said. "You were a schoolteacher's wife," I said finally, because 2 hours is a long time and the silence had teeth. "My husband taught." She said, "I doctored." She kept her eyes on the hills. "It was a hard country we lived in, harder than this in some ways, and the nearest physician was 40 miles off and a drunkard besides, and the women came to me. I'd learned it from my grandmother, who learned it from hers, the herbs, the setting of bones, the bringing of bobbies. 11 years I caught half the children born in that county." A small bitter breath. "Mr. Stowe is welcome to his joke. I've held more newborns than any woman in 300 miles. I simply never held my own." She said it flat. The way you say a thing you've worn smooth from handling, and I understood then what the slur had cost her, which was more than dignity. It had touched the one true grief under all the others. My wife died of the lung fever, I said. I don't know why I said it. I'd not spoken of it to a living soul in 6 years. 6 winters back, and the baby with her 3 days after, a boy. The words came out rusty like a pump that hasn't been worked. I doctored her wrong, or didn't doctor her at all because there was nobody to doctor and I didn't know how. I've thought 100 times that if there'd been a woman like you within 40 miles, I'd not have 2 graves on my hill. She turned and looked at me then, really looked, and the wariness in her face shifted into something else, not pity. She was too proud to hand out pity and too kind to insult me with it, but a kind of recognition, the way one wounded animal knows another by the way it carries the leg. "You can't doctor a death that's already decided, Mr. Hale," she said quietly. "I learned that the hard way too. We do what we can and we lose anyway, and the trick of living afterward is not to call it your own fault, though I never once managed the trick myself." Neither of us said anything for a while after that, but the silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of 2 strangers anymore. It was the silence of 2 people who have each shown the other a true thing and are letting it settle. The Bar H sat in a fold of land where Dry Creek ran year-round despite its name, a low log house with a stone chimney and a good barn and corrals weathered silver, and beyond the house on the rise, 2 heaps of stone with the wind going over them. She saw the graves the moment we topped the last roll of ground. I watched her see them. She didn't say anything. But that night, after I'd showed her the spare room with its bolt on the inside and laid a fire in the stove and gone out to see to the stock, I looked back from the barn and saw her standing up on the rise in the last light, hat off, looking down at those 2 stones. She wasn't praying, exactly. She just stood with them a while, the way you'd sit with somebody sick who can't talk anymore. Then she came down and went in and lit the lamp, and I stood in the cold a long time with my hands on the corral rail, and a feeling in my chest I didn't have a name for and didn't want one. That was the first day. I'll not give you all the days of that winter, though I remember every one. I'll give you the ones that mattered. She did not waste a week settling in. The morning after she came, I rose before light the way I always did and found the stove already warm and coffee already made, and a woman at my table writing in a little leather book by lamplight. By the end of the first week, she'd scoured the house from the rafters down, mended a shirt I'd given up for dead, set my few hens to laying like they'd found religion, and turned the sour leavings of my bachelor larder into food a man wanted to come in from the cold for. She did all of it without a word of asking what I wanted, because she'd understood faster than I had that the bargain went better if she simply earned, plainly and visibly, and never once put herself in the position of owing. And she kept the bolt thrown on her door every night. I heard it slide home, every night, soft, and I was glad of it, because it told me she trusted the bargain to hold, and a man who spent 6 years not trusting anything learns to set great store by a thing he can count on. The country found out about her quick. It always does. A woman who can doctor cannot stay hid in a country with no doctor, and within the month they came, not the fine folks from town, but the homestead people, the ones the Stows of the world never see. A boy with a hand laid open on a singletree that I'd brought in across my saddle from the Carver place. A woman gone past her time with a baby turned wrong, that Nell rode 11 miles in sleet to turn right, and came back 2 days later gray with no sleep and would not eat till she'd seen to my supper first, and I was angry at her for that, the only time I was ever angry at her, and she looked at me and said, "It is the bargain, Mr. Hale. I keep my bargains," and I understood I'd have to find some other way to make her rest. She charged what they could pay, which was eggs and a haunch of venison and once a hand-pieced quilt, and what they couldn't pay she took nothing for and never spoke of it again. The leather book filled up. Births, deaths, the broken and the burned and the fevered. She wrote them all down in a small clean hand, every soul she touched, the way some men keep a tally of their cattle. "Why do you write them?" I asked her one night. We'd taken to sitting by the stove after supper, her at her book, me with a length of rein I was braiding or a piece of tack I was mending, the dog between us. It wasn't anything. It wasn't courting. But it was the warmest hour of my day, and I had begun, without admitting it to myself, to measure the day by it. So they're not forgot, she said. She didn't look up. A person ought to be written down somewhere. A person ought to leave a mark that says they were here, that says somebody held them. Her pen stopped. I'll not leave children behind me, Mr. Hale. Mr. Stowe was right about that much, though he was a beast to say it. So this is what I leave, a book of names, the ones I caught coming in and the ones I couldn't keep from going out. She looked up then, and her eyes were bright and steady. It's not nothing. I've decided it's not nothing. No, I said, my voice came out rough. It's a long way from nothing. She held my eye a beat longer than the words wanted, and then she looked back down at her book, and I went back to my braiding, and the stove ticked, and outside the wind walked over the rise where my wife and son lay, and I thought, with a kind of quiet terror, that I was not as finished as I'd told the graves I was. The town did not let her be. I'd hoped, fool that I was, that the distance and the winter might wear the talk down, but Stowe had a long tongue and a longer memory, and the story he told, that he'd sent away a barren old maid, and she'd taken up house with a half-wild rancher out on Dry Creek who'd buried two of his own and likely talked to their stones. That story got better every time he told it. I heard pieces of it when I went in for supplies. Heard a clerk go quiet when I came in the door. Heard a Stowe cousin at the freight office say, just loud enough, that some men would take in anything that cook, and heard the laugh after. I am not a fighting man. Grief had burned most of the fight out of me, but I'll tell you I came close that day, came close enough that the clerk took a step back, and I had to set my hands flat on the counter and breathe before I could trust them. What stopped me wasn't peaceableness. It was the thought of going home and telling Nell I'd brawled in the freight office over her honor, and seeing her face go cold and careful, because the one thing she had asked of the world was to be let alone to earn her bread, and a man fighting over her in a public place was just one more man making her his business without her leave. So I bought my supplies and I drove home, and I said nothing. But that night, by the stove, she looked at me over her book and said, "Something happened in town." Nothing happened in town. Mr. Hale, she set the pen down. I have spent a great portion of my life watching men decide not to tell me things for my own good. It is the most tiresome form of lying there is. What did they say? So I told her. I'm a poor liar, and she'd already caught me, and I'd come to feel she had a right to know what was said in her name. I told her what the cousin said and what the room did after, and I watched her face, expecting it to go cold and careful the way I'd feared. It didn't, she laughed. It startled me clean off my stool. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh, and it was a low, warm sound with no bitterness in it at all, the laugh of a person who has been hurt so thoroughly by experts that the amateurs have stopped being able to reach her. "Oh, let them," she said, when she'd got her breath. "Let them say I'd cook for a wolf if it kept a clean house." Owen, it was the first time she called me by my name, and we both heard it, and she went on a little quick, like a person stepping over a place in the ice. I have been called barren to my face by a rich man on a public platform. There is nothing a freight clerk can say that I have not already survived worse than. The only opinion in this country I find I care about belongs to a woman who rode 11 miles to put a baby right, and another who paid me in a quilt she'd sat up 2 years to finish. The town can talk till its tongue falls out. I'm warm, and I'm fed, and I'm useful, and I sleep behind a door that locks, and I have not had as much as all 4 of those things at once in a very long while. She picked the pen back up. Don't go fighting freight clerks for me. It only proves them right that I'm worth fighting over, and I'd as soon not be worth anything to anybody. It's safer. It's lonelier, I said before I could stop the words. She went still. The pen hovered. The dog lifted his head and looked between us. "Yes," she said after a while, very low. "It's lonelier. I know the price of it. I've been paying it a long time." She set the pen down again, careful like it might break. "Owen, we made a bargain, in name only, decided by spring. I'd be grateful if you'd not stand near the edge of it on cold nights and look over, because I have stood near that edge myself once or twice this winter and looked over, and it's a long way down, and one of us has to keep our feet, and you've 2 graves on your hill that say it had better be me." It was the truest, hardest, kindest thing anyone had said to me in 6 years, and it was a no, and I took it as a no, and I should have. But she'd said it with her eyes wet, and a man doesn't forget a no said with wet eyes. It's a different animal than the dry kind. "All right," I said, "I'll keep my feet." And I tried, God knows I tried, but the heart is a poor jailer of itself. Winter dug in hard after the new year. The Antelope Flats went white, and the wind came down off the bowstring hills with a sound like the world grinding its teeth, and the work doubled: cattle to dig out of drifts, water to chop open twice a day. A stretch of 3 days when the snow came so thick, I roped a line from the house to the barn so I'd not lose myself between the two. Nell worked beside me through it. She'd not been raised to ranch work, but she learned it the way she learned everything, fast and stubborn and without complaint, and by February she could swing an axe at the ice as good as me and throw feed off the back of the sled with her hands cracked and bleeding under the gloves. And once, when a cow went down calving in a drift, the 2 of us hauled that calf out into the white with our 4 hands on the one rope and got it breathing, and stood there gasping and laughing in the storm with steam coming off us like a couple of run horses. And she looked at me with snow in her lashes and her whole face open for one unguarded second, and I had to turn away and look at the calf so I wouldn't do something we'd both regret. We didn't speak of the edge again, but we lived nearer it every day, the way you can't help living near a fire in the cold. I'd catch her watching me mend tack. She'd catch me watching her write her names. The bolt still slid home every night soft, and I was still glad of it, but now I lay awake and heard it and understood it for what it was: not a wall against me, but a wall she'd built to hold herself in, the same kind of wall I'd built on my hill. And I thought, there are 2 of us in this house keeping the same lonely watch over the same locked door, and we are both of us cowards, and we both of us have good reason. Then the throat fever came to Cedar Gap, and it burned every wall in the county to the ground. It started, the way these things do, with a child. The Halloran boy, down at the south end of town, took sick with a sore throat and a fever and was dead in 4 days, choked, his mother said after, on a gray skin that grew across the back of his throat till he couldn't draw breath. By the time they understood what it was, 3 more children were down with it, and within a week there were 11, and the drunkard doctor in the next county wouldn't come, and the church bell was going for a funeral every other day, and Cedar Gap, a proud, prosperous Cedar Gap that had laughed at a healer on its own train platform, had no one. Nell knew it for what it was the moment the first rider came out to the bar. A homestead man with 2 of his own children sick, hat in his hands, unable to look at her for shame, because he'd been on the platform that day in the fall and laughed with the rest. "It's the membranous croup," she said. She'd gone very still and very calm, the calm of a person who's seen the thing before and knows exactly how bad it is. "Diphtheria, the city doctors call it. It kills children mostly, and it kills fast, and it spreads like fire in dry grass." She was already up, already pulling down the herbs and the few precious medicines from her shelf, already a different woman than the one who'd been quietly braiding rags by the stove an hour before. How many? 11 last I heard, more by now surely. "In town. In town." She stopped. I saw her stop, saw the calculation go behind her eyes, and I knew what she was weighing because I was weighing it too. The town that had thrown her off its platform and laughed and told a story about her all winter. The town that had let a rich man call her a barren field in front of God and everybody. "They'll not want me," she said quietly. It wasn't bitterness. It was just a fact she was setting on the scale. "They'll not let a barren old maid that lives with the wolf on Dry Creek lay hands on their children. They'd rather watch them choke. Then they're fools, I said, and you'd be a fool to throw yourself under their heels for the privilege of being spat on while you save their young. You owe Cedar Gap nothing, Nell. Less than nothing. They've a debt to you that they'll never pay. She looked at me, and there it was again, that thing I'd seen the first day on the platform, the weather moving across her face, the deciding, and then the something straight and hard that was left when it passed. Owen, she said, I have a book full of names. Every one of them I held. Coming in or going out, I held them, and I wrote them down so somebody'd know they were here. She was tying her cloak as she spoke, and her hands didn't shake. There are 11 children in that town tonight that are going to start choking, and some of them are going to die, and the ones that die are going to die because there's no one within 40 miles who knows what I know. I can't sit by my own warm stove and let them choke to teach Cedar Gap a lesson about its manners. If I do that, then I am exactly the worthless thing that man said I was, and I'd rather be dead with them than be that. She pulled the cloak tight. It was never about whether they want me. It was never about whether they deserve me. It's about the children. It was always only ever about the children. Now, will you hitch the wagon, or will you stand there telling me what I owe? I have loved exactly 2 women in my life. I loved Ruth, who was gentle as falling snow and who I failed, and I loved Nell Brant, and I knew it for certain in that exact moment, watching her stand in my kitchen with her cloak tied and her medicine bag in her fist and her whole soul set on riding into the teeth of a town that had despised her to save its children from a death it didn't deserve to be saved from. I knew it, and there was no putting it back behind the wall, and I didn't try. I'll drive you, I said, and I'll not leave your side, and don't waste breath telling me to, because we made a bargain that you go where you want when you want, and I made one that I'd carry you there. Get your things. I'll hitch the team. It was 8 miles to town, and the wind was up, and the snow had started again, fine and stinging, and we made it in something under 2 hours with the team blowing hard. The first sight of Cedar Gap I'll carry to my grave. The lamps lit in every window, though it was the dead middle of the night, because nobody in that town was sleeping, and the church doors thrown open with the pews dragged out and pallets laid down in rows, and on the pallets the children, and bending over the children the mothers, helpless, listening to the small, terrible sound of young throats fighting for air. And in the church door, when we pulled up, stood Garrett Stowe. He looked 10 years older than he had in the fall. He looked like a man being unmade. Because the fever had come for the prosperous as well as the poor, it does not read a bank ledger before it chooses, and Garrett Stowe's own daughter, his Cecily, 6 years old, the child of his dead first wife. The one living person on this earth he loved more than his own consequence, lay choking on a pallet at the front of the church with a gray skin growing across her throat, and not one soul in Cedar Gap knew how to save her. He saw Nell climb down from my wagon. I watched him see her, and I watched the war go across his face, the pride that had stood on that platform and called her barren, and the father that would have crawled to her on broken knees if it would buy his girl another hour of breath. The father won. It always does, in any man who's got one in him at all, and to his everlasting credit Garrett Stowe had one in him after all, buried under all that consequence. Mrs. Brant, he said, his voice was a ruin, I have no right to ask you for anything. No, Nell said, going past him through the door with her bag, not slowing, not softening, you have not. Where are the worst of them? Take me to the worst first. The ones gone blue at the lips. Owen, get water boiling, all you can find vessels for, and clean linen torn in strips, and find me the steadiest-handed grown person in this room who won't faint, and I'll want them at my elbow all night. Move, all of you. We're going to lose some of these, and I'll not lose one we could have kept for want of hot water. And the town moved. That town that had laughed at her, it moved at her word like a regiment, because she was the only one among them who was not afraid, or who had mastered her fear so completely it looked like courage, which I've come to think is the only kind of courage there is. I will not give you all of that night. Some of it a man shouldn't say out loud. There were 11 children when we came, and there were 19 before dawn, and Nell moved among them like something out of an old story, never hurrying and never resting, her hands sure, her voice low and steady, calling each child by name when she knew it and learning the name when she didn't, because she said a child fighting for breath in the dark fights harder when somebody's saying its name. She opened throats. I'd not known a person could do such a thing. She had a slim silver tube, a thing she'd carried all the way from Ohio and never once had cause to use out here. And when a child's throat closed entirely, she'd ease that tube past the gray skin so the breath could go down it. And twice that night, I held a child's head in my two hands and kept it still while she did it, and felt the small body stop fighting and start breathing. And I am not ashamed to tell you I wept both times. A grown man weeping over a stranger's child in a freezing church, and not one person there thought the less of me for it. She lost 3. I want to be honest with you because she was always honest with me, and because a story where she saved them all would be a lie and she'd not have stood for a lie. 3 children died in that church between the time we came and the time the sun came up, and Nell was at the side of every one of them when they went, holding the hand, saying the name, and when each one was gone she took one breath, just one, with her eyes shut, and then she got up and went to the next pallet, because the next pallet had a child on it still fighting, and the dead are past your help but the living are not. Later, much later, days later, I found her name book open on the table and saw she'd written those 3 down first of all, the ones she lost, before any she saved, in her small clean hand so they'd not be forgot, so somebody'd know they were held. But she saved 16. 16 children of Cedar Gap drew breath in the morning that would not have drawn it without her, and one of the 16 was Cecily Stowe. The girl had been near the worst of them when we came, gone gray-blue at the mouth, her small chest heaving against a throat almost wholly closed, and Nell had gone to her early and worked over her long, and somewhere in the blackest part of that night, with Garrett Stowe on his knees in the aisle of his own church praying to a God he'd never had much use for, Nell eased that silver tube down past the killing skin and got the air to go. And the child's color came back from the dead to the living so slow you could have counted it, and Stowe made a sound I've never heard a man make before or since, and put his face down on his daughter's pallet, and shook. Toward dawn, when the worst of it had broken and the children who were going to live were sleeping the deep raw sleep of the spared, Garrett Stowe came and stood near Nell where she sat at last on an overturned pew, gray to the lips herself with the long night, a cup of cold coffee untouched in her hands. He stood a while not able to speak. Then he got it out. "I called you barren," he said, "on the platform, in front of the whole town. I called you a barren field and not worth the money." His voice cracked clean in half. "My daughter is alive this morning because of you. 16 children in this town are alive because of the woman I said wasn't worth her fare. There's no word low enough for what I am, Mrs. Brandt, and no way under heaven I can pay what I owe." Nell looked up at him. She was too tired for triumph, and I think too good for it besides, and what was in her face was not the cold satisfaction a smaller person would have been entitled to. It was just weariness, and a kind of sad, clear truth. "You can pay it, Mr. Stowe," she said. "Not to me, to them." She nodded at the rows of sleeping children. "These are not the only fevers that will ever come to this country. There will be others and worse, and I will not always be 8 miles off down Dry Creek. Build this town a place for the sick, pay for a real doctor and pay him enough to come. Lay in medicines before you need them, not after the children start to choke. And the next time a person steps off that train alone with nowhere to sleep," and here her voice did not rise, which made it worse for him, "you carry their trunk, Mr. Stowe, whatever their age and whatever their use to you, because you do not know, you cannot ever know, what is in them, and you came one cold night this winter within a single breath of finding that out too late." She set the cold coffee down. "That's how you pay it. Not to me. I don't want your money or your sorry. I've a book full of names and I sleep fine. Pay it to the next stranger you'd have laughed at." Garrett Stowe took it. To his credit, and I'll give him this, having given him little else, he took it like medicine, standing up straight to swallow it, and he kept his word besides, every part of it, though that's a tale for another night. Cedar Gap has a hospital now, a real one with a real doctor and a brass plate by the door, and Stowe paid for the most of it. And I notice he never once asked to have his own name on the plate, which is more humility than I'd have credited him with that morning on the platform. People change. I'd not have believed it once. I believe it now. I've watched it happen in my own chest. We drove home in the white morning with the team worn to the bone, and the snow finally stopped, and the whole world hung with light. And Nell fell asleep against my shoulder before we'd gone a mile. Just gave out all at once like a clock run down. And I drove the last 7 miles slow and careful so as not to wake her, with her head on my shoulder, and Job the dog asleep in the wagon bed. And I'll tell you that those 7 cold miles were as near to a perfect happiness as I have ever come. And I had buried a wife and a son and a great many hopes by then, and so I knew a thing or two about happiness and how rare it runs. She slept the rest of that day and the night after. I did the chores soft and kept the fire up and looked in on her now and again the way I'd once looked in on Ruth, and was surprised to find the looking didn't hurt the way I'd always feared it would, the way I'd built a 6-year wall against it hurting. Grief, I was learning, is not a wall you build once and leave standing. It's a thing you carry, and the carrying gets easier not because the weight gets less but because your back gets stronger, and a back gets stronger by carrying. And I had been refusing for 6 years to lift the weight at all, and so I had stayed weak and lonely and safe. She came down the second morning rested in her gray dress, her hair pinned up herself again, and she made the coffee, and we sat at the table, and I knew it was time. The roads were already softening. The thaw had come early off the back of that warm, bright morning. Spring was opening, and the bargain we'd made said that when spring opened the roads, Nell Brant would call for the wagon and I would carry her to the depot, and she would go, for any reason or none, and I would be free of her. I did not want to be free of her. I had never in my life wanted anything so little as I wanted to be free of her. "The roads are opening," I said. I made myself say it. A fair bargain plainly kept, that was the one thing she'd ever asked of the world, and I'd not cheat her of it now by pretending the spring wasn't coming. Our bargain said when they did, you'd name the day and I'd drive you to the train. I'll keep it. I'll keep it the minute you say. You go where you want when you want, that was the other half, and it stands. My voice was steadier than my insides. But I find I've got something to say first, and you can throw it back in my teeth, and I'll drive you to the depot just the same, and no harm done and no debt owed, the way we agreed. May I say it?" She had gone very still across the table, her cup halfway to her mouth. She set it down. "Say it," she said. "I made a vow once," I said, "on my hill over 2 graves, that I was finished with the wanting and the caring and the kind of loving that hands a man over to grief. I kept that vow 6 years, and I was proud of it, and it was killing me the whole time, slow, the way a held breath kills you. And then a woman got thrown off a train platform in Cedar Gap, and I picked up her trunk, and I've not drawn an easy breath since, and that's the first easy trouble I've had in 6 years, and I find I don't want it to stop. I had to look at my hands to get the rest out. I called this winter in name only. I told you I'd keep my feet, and I tried, and I couldn't, and I've been standing near the edge looking over for months, and I'm done pretending I'm not. I'm not asking you to need me. You don't need any man, and I'd not insult you by saying you did. You rode into a town that hated you and saved its children with your own 2 hands, and I've never seen a soul on this earth stand straighter or need less. I'm asking you to want me, the way I've come to want you. Not as a bargain, not as wages and a roof. As my wife, and an equal, with your name on this land beside mine, and your book of names on the shelf for as long as we both live, and the door with the bolt yours to lock against me to your dying day if it ever pleases you to, because I'd not have you unless you came free, the way you do everything else." I made myself look up. "You'll leave no children behind you, Nell. You told me that the first day in the wagon, and I've thought of it every day since, and I want you to hear me say it plain. I don't care. I had a child, and I buried him, and I'd not trade the woman you are for 10 sons. You'll leave a book of names and a county full of people breathing that wouldn't be, and a man on Dry Creek who was a dead thing walking till you stepped off that train, and if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life being one more name in your book, Owen Hale, that you caught coming in, 6 years too late and still in time. I ran out of words. I'd never said so many at once in my life. That's it. That's the whole of it. The wagon's hitched whenever you want it. She did not say anything for a long time. The stove ticked. Out on the hill, the wind went over the two stones, gentler now, the way it does when spring's coming. And then I saw the weather move across her face, the way it had that first day on the platform, the deciding, plain to watch. Only this time when it passed, what was left wasn't the straight hard thing that had carried her through a winter of being thrown away. What was left was her crying, and smiling while she did it, which I'd never seen her do and could not have imagined, and have thanked God for every day of the long good years since. "You great fool of a man," she said, and her voice shook for the first and last time I ever knew it to shake. "I unbolted that door a week ago. I've been lying awake every night since wondering if you'd ever once try it, and cursing you for keeping the bargain so well, and cursing myself worse for making such a hard one." She reached across the table and took my two hands in her two cracked, capable, miraculous hands, the hands that had opened a town's worth of children's throats in the dark. "I don't want the train, Owen. I've not wanted the train since about the second week of January. I want the hill and the book and the dog and the fool. I want to be written down somewhere. I want somebody to hold me." She gripped my hands hard. "Put your name beside mine on the land. And take me up to your hill, and let me meet Ruth and the boy proper. Because if I'm to live here, I'll live here with all of you, the living and the gone. And I'll not have you visiting them alone in the wind ever again." We were married 3 weeks later in the new green of the year, in the same Cedar Gap church where she'd opened the children's throats. And the whole town came, every soul of it, the homestead people who'd loved her all winter and the town people who'd learned too. And Garrett Stowe stood up in the front pew with his Cecily by the hand. And when the preacher asked who gave this woman, there was a moment's silence because Nell Brant had no people in this country to give her, having come alone and been thrown away. And then Cecily Stowe, 6 years old, alive and breathing because of the bride, piped up in the silence, clear as a bell, "I do." And the whole church laughed and wept at once, and Nell looked at me down the length of that aisle with her face open and unguarded and unafraid, both hearts of us, mine that had been buried and hers that had been thrown away, beating at last in the same warm room. That was a long time ago now. The larkspur comes up blue on the hill every May, over 3 graves now instead of 2, for we buried Job the old dog up there years back beside Ruth and the boy, where Nell said he'd want to keep his watch. There are no children of ours on that hill, and none in the house, and there never were. And Garrett Stowe was right about that one cold fact and wrong about everything that mattered, which is the way of small men who weigh the world on a scale that can't measure the only things worth weighing. But there is a shelf in the front room with 30 years of leather books on it, full of names in a small clean hand, every soul my wife caught coming into this world or held going out of it. And on the last page of the last one, when her own time came, gentle and unafraid with my hand in hers, she'd had me write her name down with all the rest, so she'd not be forgot, so somebody'd know she was here, so somebody'd know she was held. I held her 30 years. And every day of them I gave quiet thanks for the cruelest thing I ever heard a man say on a train platform, because it was the door my whole second life walked through that, and the singular fool's luck that put me by the freight scale with a sack of coffee on my shoulder, the noon a rich man told the world that a woman wasn't worth her fare, and was so wrong, so completely and forever wrong, that I have spent the rest of my days proving it, one name at a time.